Alrighty, sorry about the delay. Welcome back to another thrilling installment of Free Read Fridays. I'm your intrepid narrator, Fraggeth, and today we gonna be doing a new book. Well, that looks like it might have broken. Nope, it's still going, I think. Let me find out. Is the stream running? Yes, there. I cannot tell if YouTube is doing it. That's a bad sign. Come on. Where are you? Ah, there it is. Okay. Oh, that's weird. Anyway, yes, it looks like people are indeed watching. Okay. Cool, cool, cool. Excellent. Very good. Let me make sure that's muted. That's muted. That's muted. Very good. Okay. Anyway, so a new book. Because right now we're doing a trading off dueling trilogies, where we started with Destination Void, then we went to the Three Body Problem, then we went to the Jesus Incident, then we did the Dark Forest, and now we're doing the Lazarus Effect, um, in which, let me get a bookmark over here real quick. Plop. There we go. In which, let's see, so it is taking place after the Jesus incident. It is taking place well after the Jesus incident. It is a long ways in the future. In fact, I'm not sure how long off the top of my head. Um, it's at least 100 years. It's probably much, much, much longer. Um, we are a ways out from that point in time, and we kind of just get right into it. When we do, in the finest of Frank Herbert tradition. Just kind of throws you in the deep end and hopes you know what's going on. As a result, it winds up standing on its own pretty well. There are allusions to things from the Jesus incident, and not really to Destination Void, but definitely the Jesus incident. Um, at any rate, let's see. What's to say? So instead of putting you in absolutely cold, I'll give you the basic premise. So we're a ways in the future from the Jesus incident, um, but far enough out that we don't know how far out we are. Let's see what's going on now. So the basic setting notes are as follows. After the events of the Jesus incident, humanity has kind of split into two camps. Um, and right now, Pandora, the planet, is basically has no land above water, or next to no land above water. Nobody's able to live on whatever land might be above water. This is, if you'll remember, for the Jesus incident, this is largely because there's no kelp. Um, the lectrokelp has been badly thwacked, as it were. And so you kind of have humanity living in two camps. You've got the Mermen, who live underwater in undersea aqua bases. Um, they look pretty much like we do, what we would recognize as human normal. They generally have a few science projects and engineering projects going on. Um, and then you have the Islanders, who are a varying panoply of mutations and different forms, shapes, and sizes. And they work in with biotechnology largely, as you'll find. I think that's really it that I can do for setting notes. That pretty much covers it. Anyway, without further ado, let's get into it. And yeah, how many pages did I have slotted? I right now have about 50 set aside. We will see how that goes, and we'll go from there. This one actually won't go on too long if that's the case. Maybe 6 to 8 portions. 6, it's looking like. Add a quick eyeball. Alrighty, without further ado, let me get a quick drink of water here, and we will be off and to the races. The Lazarus Effect by Frank Herbert and Bill Ransom.
The histories assert that a binary system cannot support life, but we found life here on Pandora. Except for the kelp, it was antagonistic and deadly, but it was still life. Ship's judgment is upon us now because we wiped out the kelp and unbalanced this world. We few survivors are subject to the endless sea and the terrible vagaries of the two suns. That we survive at all on our fragile clone rafts is as much a curse as a victory. This is the time of madness. Hallie Eckel, The Journals. Duque smelled burning flesh and scorched hair. He sniffed, sniffed again, and whined. His one good eye watered and pained him when he tried to knuckle it open. His mother was out. Out was a word he could say, like hot and ma. He could not precisely identify the location and shape of out. He knew vaguely that his quarters were on a clone raft anchored off a black stone pinnacle, all that remained of Pandora's land surface. The burning smells were stronger now. They frightened him. Duque wondered if he should say something. Mostly he did not talk. His nose got in the way. He could whistle through his nose, though, and his mother understood. She would whistle back. Between them they understood more than 100 whistle words. Duque wriggled his forehead. This uncurled his thick, knobby nose, and he whistled, tentative at first to see whether she was near. "Ma? Where are you, Ma?" He listened for the unmistakable scuff slap of her bare feet on the soft, slick deck of the raft. Burning smells filled his nose and made him sneeze. He heard the slaps of many feet out in the corridor, more feet than he had ever before heard out there, but nothing he could identify as Ma. There was shouting now, words Duque didn't know. He sucked in a deep breath and let go the loudest whistle he could muster. His thin ribs ached with it, and the vibration made him dizzy. No one responded. The hatch beside him remained closed. No one plucked him out of his twisted covers and held him close. Despite the pain of the smoke, Duque peeled back his right eyelid with the two nubs on his right hand and saw that the room was dark, except for a glow against the thin organics of the corridor wall. Dull orange light cast a frightening illumination over the deck. Acrid smoke hung like a cloud above him, tendrils of its oily blackness reaching downward toward his face. And now there were other sounds outside added to the shouting and the slap slap of many feet. He heard big things dragging and bumping along his glowing wall. Terror held him curled into a silent lump under the covers of his bunk. The burning smells contained a steamy, bitter flavor, not quite the sticky sweet of the time when the stove scorched their wall. He remembered the charred melt of organics opening a new passage between their room and the next one along the corridor. He had poked his head through the burned opening and whistled at their neighbors. The smells now were not the same, though, and the glowing wall did not melt away. A rumbling was added to the outside sounds, like a pot boiling over on the stove, but his mother was not cooking. Besides, it was too loud for cooking, louder even than the other corridor noises. Now there were screams nearby. Duque kicked off his covers and gasped when his bare feet touched the deck. Hot! Abruptly, the deck pitched, first backward and then forward. The motion lurched him face first through the bulkhead. The hot organics of the wall stretched and parted for him like a cooked noodle. He knew he was on the outer deck, but stumbling feet kept him too busy covering his head and body with his arms. He could not spare a hand to open his good eye. The hot deck burned his knees and elbows. Duque caught his breath in the sudden onslaught of pain and wrenched out another shrill whistle. Somebody stumbled against him. Hands reached under his armpits and lifted him clear of the scorched bubbly that had been the deck. Some of it came loose with him and stuck to his bare skin. Duque knew who held him by the jasmine smell of her hair. Ellie, the neighbor woman with the short, stubby legs and beautiful voice. "Duque," she said, "let's go find your ma." He heard something wrong in her voice. It rasped low in a dry throat and cracked when she spoke. "Ma," he said. He knuckled his eye open and saw a nightmare of movement and firelight. Ellie shouldered them through the crowd, saw that he was looking around, and slapped his hand away. "Look later," she said. "Right now you hang on to my neck. Hold tight." After that one brief glimpse, there was no need to repeat the order. He clutched both arms around Ellie's neck. A small whimper escaped his throat. Ellie continued to push them through a crowd of people, voices all around, saying words Duque did not understand. Movement against the others peeled away chunks of bubbly from his skin. It hurt. That one look at out remained indelibly in Duque's memory. Fire had been coming out of the dark water. It coiled up out of the water accompanied by that thick boiling sound, and the air was so full of steam that people were shadow clumps against the hot red glow of flames. Screams and shouts still sounded all around, causing Duque to hold even tighter to Ellie's neck. Chunks of the fire had rocketed into the sky high above their island. Duque did not understand this, but he heard the fire crash and sizzle through the body of the island into the sea beneath. Why water burn? He knew the whistle words, but Ellie would not understand. The raft tipped sharply under Ellie and sent her sprawling beneath the trampling feet, with Duque atop her, shielded from the burning deck. Ellie cursed and gasped. More people fell around them. Duque felt Ellie sinking into the melting organics of the deck. She struggled at first, thrashing like a fresh-caught murrey that his mother had put into his hands once before she cooked it. Ellie's twisting slowed, and she began moaning low in her throat. Duque, still clutching Ellie's neck, felt hot bubbly against his hands and jerked them away. Ellie screamed. Duque tried to push himself away from her, but the press of bodies all around prevented his escape. He felt the hair at the nape of his neck standing up. A questing whistle broke from his nose, but there was no response. The deck tilted again, and bodies rolled onto Duque. He felt hot flesh, some of it warm wet. Ellie gasped once, very deep. The air changed. The people screaming, "Oh no! Oh no!" stopped screaming. Many people began coughing all around Duque. He coughed too, choking on hot, thick dust. Someone nearby gasped, "I've got water! Help me! We must save her!" Duque sensed a stillness in Ellie. She wasn't moaning anymore. He could not feel the rise and fall of her breathing. Duque opened his mouth and spoke the two words he knew best. "Ma! Hot, Ma! Ma!" Someone right beside him said, "Who's that?" "Hot, Ma!" Duque said. Hands touched him and hauled him away from Ellie. A voice next to his ear said, "It's a child. He's alive." "Bring him!" someone called between coughs. "We've got Vata!" Duque himself passed from hand to hand through an opening into a dimly lighted place. His one good eye saw through a thinner dust haze the glitter of tiny lights, shiny surfaces and handles. He wondered if this could be the "out" where Ma went, but there was no sign of Ma, only many people crowded into a small space. Someone directly in front of him held a large naked infant. He knew about infants because Ma sometimes brought them from "out" and cared for them, cooing over them and letting Duque touch them and pet them. Infants were soft and nice. This infant looked larger than any Duque had ever seen, but he knew she was only an infant. Those fat features, that still face. The air pressure changed, popping in Duque's ears. Something began to hum. Just when Duque was deciding to come out of his fears and join in this warm closeness of flesh, three gigantic explosions shook all of them, sending their enclosed space tumbling. Boom! 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 The explosions came one on top of the other. People began extricating themselves from the tumble of flesh. A foot touched Duque's face and was withdrawn. "Careful of the little ones," someone said. Strong hands lifted Duque and helped him open his eye. A pale masculine face peered at him, a wide face with deeply set brown eyes. The man spoke. "I've got the other one. He's no beauty, but he's alive." "Here, give him to me," a woman said. Duque found himself pressed close to the infant. A woman's arms held them both, flesh to flesh, warmth to warmth. A sense of reassurance swept through Duque, but it was cut off immediately when the woman spoke. He understood her words. He did not know how he understood, but the meanings were there, unfolding as her voice rumbled against his cheek, pressed to her breast. "The whole island exploded," the woman said. "I saw it through the port." "We're well below the surface now," a man said, "but we can't stay long with this many people breathing our air." "We will pray to rock," the woman said. "And to ship," a man said. "To rock and to ship," they all agreed. Duque heard all of this from a distance as more understanding flooded his awareness. It was happening because his flesh touched the flesh of the infant. He knew the infant's name now. Vata. A beautiful name. The name brought with it a blossoming mindful of information, as though the knowledge had always been there, needing only Vata's name and her touch to spread it through his memory. Now he was aware of "out," all of it as known through human senses and kelp memories, because Vata carried kelp genes in her human flesh. He remembered the place of the kelp deep under the sea, the tendrils clinging to precious rock. He remembered the minuscule islands that no longer existed because the kelp was gone and the sea fury had been unleashed. Kelp memories and human memories revealed wondrous things happening to Pandora now that waves could roam freely around this planet, which was really a distorted ball of solid matter submerged in an endless skin of water. Duque knew where he was, too, in a small submersible, which should have had a lighter-than-air carrier attached to it. Out was a place of marvels. And all of this wondrous information had come to him directly from the mind of Vata, because she had kelp genes, as did he. As did many of Pandora's surviving humans. Genes. He knew about those marvels, too, because Vata's mind was a magic storehouse of such things, telling him about history and the clone wars and the death of all the kelp. He sensed a direct link between Vata and himself, which endured even when he pulled away from physical contact with her. Duque experienced a great thankfulness for this, and tried to express his gratitude, but Vata refused to respond. He understood then that Vata wanted the deep-sea quiet of her kelp memories. She wanted only the waiting. She did not want to deal with the things she had dumped onto him. She had dumped them, he realized, shedding these things like a painful skin. Duque felt a momentary pique at this realization, but happiness returned immediately. He was the repository of such wonders. Consciousness. That's my department, he thought. I must be aware for both of us. I am the storage system, the ox gate, which only Vata can open. There were giants in the earth in those days. Genesis, the Christian Book of the Dead. 22 Bunrati 468. Why do I keep this journal? This is a strange hobby for the Chief Justice and Chairman of the Committee on Vital Forms. Do I hope that a historian will some day weave rich elaborations out of my poor scribblings? I can just see someone like Izbushka stumbling onto my journal many years from now, his mind crammed full of the preconceptions that block acceptance of the truly new. Would Bushka destroy my journal because it conflicted with his own theories? I think this may have happened with other historians in our past. Why else would Ship have forced us to start over? I'm convinced that this is what Ship has done. Oh, I believe in Ship. Let it be recorded here and now that Ward Keel believes in Ship. Ship is God, and Ship brought us here to Pandora. This is our ultimate trial, sink or swim in the most literal sense. Well, almost. We islanders mostly float. It's the Mermen who swim. What a perfect testing ground for humankind is this Pandora, and how aptly named! Not a shard of land left above its sea, which the kelp once subdued. Once a noble creature, intelligent, known to all creatures of this world as a Vata, it is now simply kelp, thick, green, and silent. Our ancestors destroyed Avata, and we inherited a planetary sea. Have we humans ever done that before? Have we killed off the thing that subdues the deadliness in our lives? Somehow, I suspect we have. Else why would Ship leave those hibernation tanks to tantalize us in orbit just beyond our reach? Our chaplain psychiatrist shares this suspicion. As she says, there is nothing new under the suns. I wonder why Ship's imprimatur always took the form of the eye within the pyramid. I begin this journal simply as an account of my own stewardship on the committee that determines which new life will be permitted to survive and perhaps breed. We mutants have a deep regard for the variations that the bioengineering of that brilliant madman, Jesus Lewis, set adrift in the human gene pool. From those incomplete records we still have, it's clear that human once had a much narrower definition. Mutant variations that we now accept without a passing glance were once cause for consternation, even death. As a committeeman passing judgment on life, the question I always ask myself and try to answer with my poor understanding is, will this new life, this infant, help us all survive? If there is the remotest chance that it will contribute to this thing we call human society, I vote to let it live. And I have been rewarded time and again by that hidden genius in cruel form, that mind plus distorted body which enrich us all. I know I am correct in these decisions. But my journal has developed a tendency to wander. I have decided that I am secretly a philosopher. I want to know not only what, but why. In the long generations since that terrible night when the last of Pandora's true land-based islands exploded into molten lava, we have developed a peculiar social duality, which I am convinced could destroy us all. We islanders, with our organic cities floating willy-nilly on the sea's surface, believe we have formed the perfect society. We care for each other, for the inner other that the skin, whatever shape or shade, protects. Then what is it about us that insists on saying us and them. Is there a viciousness buried in us? Will it explode us into violence against the excluded others? Oh, islanders exclude. This cannot be denied. Our jokes betray us. Anti-Mermen jokes. Merms, we call them, or pretties. And they call us mutes. It's a grunt word, no matter how you sound it. We are jealous of mermen. There it is. I have written it. Jealous. They have the freedom of all the land beneath the sea. Merman mechanization depends on a relatively uniform, traditional human body. Few islanders can compete under middle-class conditions, so they occupy the top of Merman genius or the depths of its slums. Even so, islanders who migrate down under are confined to islander communities, ghettos. Still, the islander idea of heaven is to pass for a pretty. Mermen repel the sea to survive. Their living space benefits from a kind of stability underfoot. Historically, I must admit, humans show a preference for a firm surface underfoot, air to breathe freely, although theirs is depressingly damp, and solid things all around. They produce an occasional webbed foot or hand, but that, too, was common all down the lineage of the species. Merman appearance is that of humans for as long as likenesses have been recorded. That much we can see for ourselves. Besides, clone wars happened. Our immediate ancestors wrote of this. Jesus Lewis did this to us. The visible evidence of other is inescapable. But I was writing about Merman nature. It is their self-proclaimed mission to restore the kelp. But will the kelp be conscious? Kelp once more lives in the sea. I have seen the effects in my lifetime, and expect we've just about seen the last of the wave walls. Exposed land will surely follow. Yet how does that subtract from this nature that I see in Mermen? By bringing back the kelp, they seek to control the sea. That is the Merman nature. Control. Islanders float with the waves and the winds and the currents. Mermen would control these forces and control us. Islanders bend with things that might otherwise overwhelm them. They are accustomed to change but grow tired of it. Mermen fight against certain kinds of change and are growing tired of that. Now I come to my view of what ship did with us. I think it is the nature of our universe that life may encounter a force that could overwhelm it if life cannot bend. Mermen would break before such a force. Islanders bend and drift. I think we may prove the better survivors.
We bear our original sin in our bodies and on our faces.
Simone Rocksack, chaplain psychiatrist. The cold slap of a sudden wave over the side snapped Queet's twisp full awake. He yawned, unkinked his overlong arms where they had tangled themselves in the tarp. He wiped the spray from his face with his shirt sleeve. Not yet full sunrise, he noted. The first thin feathers of dawn tickled the black belly of the horizon. No thunderheads cluttered the sky, and his two squawks, their feathers preened and glistening, muttered contentedly on their tethers. He rubbed the circulation back into his long arms and felt in the bottom of the coracle for his tube of thick juice concentrates and proteins. Blech! He made a wry face as he sucked down the last of the tube. The concentrate was tasteless and odorless, but he balked at it just the same. You'd think if they made it edible, they could make it palatable, he thought. At least dockside we'll get some real food. The rigors of setting and hauling fishing nets always built his appetite into a monumental thing that concentrates could support but never satisfy. The gray ocean yawned away in all directions. Not a sign of dashers or any other threat anywhere. The occasional splatter of a sizable wave broke over the rim of the coracle, but the organic pump in the bilge could handle that. He turned and watched the slow bulge of their net foam the slow bulge of their net foam the surface behind them. It listed slightly with its heavy load. Twisp's mouth watered at the prospect of 1,000 kilos of Scylla. Boiled Scylla, fried Scylla, baked Scylla, with cream sauce and hot rolls.
Queets, are we there yet?
Brett's voice cracked in its adolescent way. Only the shock of his thick blond hair stuck out from under their tarp, a sharp contrast to Twisp's headful of ebony fur. Brett Norton was tall for 16, and his pile of hair made him seem even taller. This first season of fishing had already begun to fill in some of his thin, bony structure. Twisp sucked in a slow breath, partly to calm himself after being startled, partly to draw in patience.
Not yet, he said. Drift is right. We should overtake the island just after sunrise. Eat something.
The boy grimaced and rummaged in his kit for his own meal. Twisp watched as the boy wiped the spout nearly clean, unstoppered it, and sucked down great gulps of the untantalizing brown liquid.
Yum. Yum.
Brett's gray eyes were shut tight as he shuddered. Twisp smiled.
I should quit thinking of him as the boy.
16 years was more than boyhood, and a season at the nets had hardened his eyes and thickened his hands. Twisp often wondered what had made Brett choose to be a fisherman. Brett was near enough to Mermen body type that he could have gone down under and made a good life there.
He's self-conscious about his eyes, Twisp thought, but that's something few people notice.
Brett's gray eyes were large, but not grotesque. Those eyes could see well in almost total darkness, which turned out to be handy for round-the-clock fishing.
That's something the Mermen wouldn't let out of their hands, Twisp thought. They're good at using people.
A sudden lurch of the net caught both of them off balance, and they reached simultaneously for the rim line. Again the lurch.
"Brett!"
Twisp shouted.
"Get us some slack while I haul in."
"But we can't haul in," the boy said. "We'd have to dump the catch."
"There's a Merman in the net. A Merman will drown if we don't haul in."
Twisp was already dragging in the heavy net lines hand over hand. The muscles of his long forearms nearly burst the skin with the effort. This was one of those times he was thankful he had a mutant's extra ability. Brett ducked out of sight behind him to man their small electric skull. The net lines telegraphed a frantic twisting and jerking from below.
"Merman for sure,"
Twisp thought, and strained even harder. He prayed he could get him up in time.
Or her,
he thought. The first Merman he'd seen net-bound was a woman. Beautiful. He shook off the memory of the crisscross lines, the net burns in her perfect, pale, dead skin. He hauled harder.
30 meters of net to go,
he thought. Sweat stung his eyes, and small blades of pain seared his back.
"Queets!"
He looked from the net back to Brett and saw white-eyed terror. Twisp followed the boy's gaze. What he saw 300 or 400 meters to starboard made him freeze. The squawks set up a fluttering outcry that told Twisp what his eyes were barely able to confirm.
"A hunt of dashers!"
He almost whispered it, almost let slip the net lines creasing his rock-hard palms.
"Help me here!"
Twisp shouted. He returned to the frantic tugging at the net. Out of the corner of one eye he saw the boy grab the port line. Out of the other he watched the steady froth of the oncoming dashers.
"I'll have a dozen of 'em at least," he thought. "Shit!"
"What'll they do?" Brett's voice cracked again. Twisp knew that the boy had heard stories. Nothing could match the real thing. Hungry or not, dashers hunted. Their huge forepaws and saber-like canines killed for the sheer bloody love of it. These dashers wanted that merman. Too late, Twisp dove for the lasgun he kept wrapped in oiled cloth in the cuddy. Frantically, he scrabbled for the weapon, but the first of the dashers hit the net head on, and their momentum rocked the coracle. The two others fanned to the sides, closing on the flanks like a fist. Twisp felt the two hard hits as he came up with the lasgun. He saw the net go slack as slashing claws and fangs opened it wide. The rest of the hunt closed in, scavenging bits of meat and bone thrown clear of the frothy mess that had been a merman. One dasher nipped another, and, primed to kill, the rest turned on their wounded mate and tore him to bits. Fur and green gore splattered the side of the coracle. No need wasting a lasgun charge on that mess. It was a bitter thought. Islanders had long ago given up the hope that they might exterminate these terrible creatures. Twisp shook himself alert, fumbled for his knife, and cut the net lines. "But why?" He didn't answer Brett's protest, but toggled a switch under the skull housing. One of the that by the way, skull is SCULL, as in sculling or scullery maid. Anyway, one of the dashers froze not a meter from their gunwale. It sank slowly, drifting back and forth, like a feather falling on a breezeless day. The others made passes at the coracle, but retreated once they felt the edge of the stun shield on their noses. They settled for the stunned dasher, then thrashed their way out to sea. Twisp rewrapped his lasgun and wedged it under the seat. He switched off the shield then and stared at the ragged shards that had been their net. "Why'd you cut loose the net?" Brett's voice was petulant, demanding. He sounded near tears. "Shock," Twisp thought, "and losing the catch." "They tore the net to get him," Twisp explained. "We'd have lost the catch anyway." "We could have saved some of it," Brett muttered. "A third of it was right here." Brett slapped the rim line at the stern, his eyes two gray threats against a harsh blue sky. Twisp sighed, aware that adrenaline could arouse frustrations that needed release. "You can't activate a stun shield with the lines over the side like that," he explained. "It's got to be all the way in or all the way out. With this cheap-ass model, anyway." His fist slammed one of the thwarts. "I'm shook as the kid," he thought. He took a deep breath, ran his fingers through the thick kinks of his black hair, and calmed himself before activating the dasher warning signal on his radio. That would locate them and reassure Vachon. "They'd have turned on us next," he said. He flicked a finger against the material between thwarts. "This stuff is one thick membrane, 2 centimeters thick. What do you think our odds were?" Brett lowered his eyes. He pursed his full lips, then stuck the lower lip out in a half pout. His gaze looked away past a rising of Big Sun come to join its sister star already overhead. Below Big Sun, just ahead of the horizon, a large silhouette glowed orange in the water. "Home," Twisp said quietly. "The city." They were in one of the tight trade currents close to the surface. It would allow them to overtake the floating mass of humanity in an hour or two. "Big fucking deal," Brett said. "We're broke." Twisp smiled and leaned back to enjoy the suns. "That's right," he said. "And we're alive." The boy grunted, and Twisp folded his meter-and-a-half arms behind his head. The elbows stuck out like two strange wings and cast a grotesque shadow on the water. He stared up across one of the elbows, caught as he sometimes was reflecting on the uniqueness of his mutant in... No, I had it right the first time. I think. He stared up across one of the elbows, caught, as he sometimes was, reflecting on the uniqueness of his mutant inheritance. These arms gangled in his way most of his life. He could touch his toes without bending over at all. But his arms hauled nets as though bred for it. Maybe they were, he mused. Who knows any more? Handy mostly for nets and for reach, they made sleeping uncomfortable. Women seemed to like their strength and their wraparound quality, though. Compensation. Maybe it's the illusionist's security, he thought, and his smile widened. His own life was anything but secure. Nobody who went down to the sea was secure, and anybody who thought so was either a fool or dead. What will the maritime court do to us? Brett's voice was low, barely audible over the splashings of the waves and the continued ruffled mutterings of the two squawks. Twisp continued to enjoy the drift as the warm sunlight on his face and arms. He gnawed his thin lips for a blink, then said, "Ought to say, did you see a Mermen marker?" "No." "Do you see one now?" He listened to the faint rustle across the coracle and knew that the boy scanned the horizon. Twisp had picked the boy for those exceptional eyes. That and his attitude. "Not a sign," the boy said. "He must have been alone." "That's not likely," Twisp said. "Mermen seldom travel alone, but it's a sure bet somebody's alone." "Do we have to go to court?" Twisp opened his eyes and saw the genuine fear in Brett's downturned mouth. The boy's wide eyes were impossible moons in his unstubbled face. "Yep." Brett plopped down on the thwart beside Twisp, rocking the little boat so hard that water lapped over the sides. "What if we don't tell?" he asked. "How would they know?" Twisp turned away from the boy. Brett had a lot to learn about the sea and those who worked it. There were many laws, and most of them stayed unwritten. This would be a hard first lesson, but what could you expect of a kid fresh from the inside? Things like this didn't happen at Center. Life there was nice. Scylla and Murray were dinner to people living in the island's inner circle. They weren't creatures with patterns and lives and a bright final flutter in the palm of the hand. "Mermen keep track of everything," Twisp said flatly. "They know." "But the Dashers," Brett insisted. "Maybe they got the other Merman too. If there was another one." "Dasher fur has hollow cells," Twisp said, "for insulation and flotation. They can't dive worth a damn." Twisp leveled his black eyes at the kid and said, "What about his family waiting back home? Now shut up." He knew the kid was hurt, but what the hell? If Brett was going to live on the sea, he'd better learn the way of it. Nobody liked being surprised out here, or abandoned. Nobody liked being boat-bound with a motor mouth, either. Besides, Twisp was beginning to feel the proximity and inevitable discomfort of the maritime court, and he thought he'd better start figuring out their case. Netting a merman was serious business, even if it wasn't your fault.
The fearful can be the most dangerous when they gain power. They become demoniac when they see the unpredictable workings of all that life around them. Seeing the strengths as well as the weaknesses, they fasten only on the weaknesses.
Ship quotes. The histories. Except for the movements of the operators and their occasional comments, it was quiet in Sonde Control this morning, a stillness insulated from the daylight topside beneath 100 meters of water and the thick walls of this merman complex. The subdued remoteness filled Izbushka with disquiet. He knew his senses were being assaulted by merman strangeness, an environment alien to most islanders, but the exact source of his unease escaped him. Everything's so quiet, he thought. All that weight of water over his head gave Bushka no special concern. He had overcome that fear while doing his compulsory service in the Islander subs. The attitude of superiority that he could detect in the mermen around him, that was the source of his annoyance. Bushka glanced left to where his fellow observers stood slightly apart, keeping their distance from the lone islander in this company. Gilar Gallo leaned close to the woman beside him, Karine Ale, and asked,
Why is the launch delayed?
Ale spoke in a softly modulated voice. I heard someone say there was an order from the chaplain psychiatrist, something about the blessing. Gallo nodded, and a lock of blond hair dropped to his right eyebrow. He brushed it back with a casual movement. Gallo was quite the most beautiful human male Bushka had ever seen. A Greek god, if the histories were to be credited. As an islander historian by avocation, Bushka believed the histories. Gallo's golden hair was long and softly waved. His dark blue eyes looked demandingly at everything they encountered. His even, white teeth flashed smiles that touched nothing but his mouth, as though he displayed the perfect teeth in that perfect face only for the benefit of onlookers. Some said he had been operated on to remove webs from his fingers and toes, but that could be a jealous lie. Bushka studied Ale covertly. It was said that Mermen were petitioning Ale to mate with Gallo for the sake of beautiful offspring. Ale's face was an exquisitely proportioned oval with full lips, widely spaced blue eyes. Her nose, slightly upturned, showed a smooth and straight ridgeline. Her skin, perfectly set off by her dark red hair, was a pinkish translucence that Bushka thought would require salves and ointments when her duties took her topside into the harsh presence of the suns. Bushka looked past them at the giant console with its graphic operational keys and large screens. One screen showed brilliant light on the ocean surface far above them. Another screen revealed the undersea tube where the lighter-than-air hydrogen sonde was being prepared for its upward drift and launch into Pandora's turbulent atmosphere. A thin forest of kelp wavered in the background. On Bushka's right, a triple thickness of plasglass also revealed the LTA launch base with mermen swimming around it. Some of the swimmers wore press tubes for for oxygen, all encased in their tight-fitting dive suits. Others carried across their backs the organic airfish that Islander bioengineering had pioneered for sustained work undersea.
We can produce it, but we cannot have the freedom of the undersea in which to use it.
Bushka could see where the leech mouth of an airfish attached itself to a nearby merman's carotid artery. He imagined the thousands of cilia pumping fresh oxygen into the worker's bloodstream. Occasionally, a worker equipped with an airfish vented carbon dioxide in a stream of drifting bubbles from the corner of his mouth.
How does it feel to float freely in the sea, dependent on the symbiotic relationship with an airfish?
It was a thought full of Islander resentments. Islander bioengineering surpassed that of the mermen, but everything Islander genius produced was gobbled up in the terrible need for valuable exchange.
As I would like to be gobbled up, but there's not much hope of that.
Bushka suppressed feelings of jealousy. He could see his reflection in the plas. The Committee on Vital Forms had faced no trouble in accepting him as human. He obviously fell somewhere near the merman tip of the spectrum. Still, his heavy-set body, his small stature, the large head with its stringy dark brown hair, thick brows, wide nose, wide mouth, square chin, none of this came near the standard Gallo represented. Comparisons hurt. Bushka wondered what the tall, disdainful merman was thinking.
Why that quizzical expression aimed at me?
Gallo returned his attention to Ale, touching her bare shoulder, laughing at something she said. A new flurry of activity could be seen at the LTA launch base, more lights within the tube that would guide the sonde on the start of its journey toward the surface. The launch director at the control console said,
It'll be a few minutes yet.
Bushka sighed. This experience was not turning out the way he had expected, the way he had dreamed. He sneered at himself.
Fantasy.
When he had been notified that he would be the Islander observer at this launch into the realm of ship, elation had filled him. His first trip into the core of Mermen civilization. At last! And the fantasy.
Possibly, just possibly, I will find the way to join Merman society, to abandon poverty and the grubby existence topside.
Learning that Gallo would be his escort had fanned his hopes. Galar Gallo, director of the Merman Screen, one who could vote to accept an islander into their society. But Gallo appeared to be avoiding him now, and there had never been any doubt of the man's disdain. Only Ale had been warmly welcoming, but then she was a member of the Merman government, a diplomat and envoy to the islanders. Bushka had been surprised to discover that she also was a medical doctor. Rumor had it she had gone through the rigors of medical education as a gesture of rebellion against her family, with its long tradition of service in the diplomatic corps and elsewhere in the Merman government. The family obviously had won out. Ale was securely seated among the powerful, held, perhaps, greater power than any other member of her family. Both the Merman and island worlds buzzed with the recent revelation that Ale was a major inheritor in the estates of the late Ryan and Elena Wang, and Ale had been named guardian of the Wang's only daughter, Scudi. Nobody had yet put a number on the size of the Wang estate, but the senior director of Mermen Mercantile had probably been the wealthiest man on Pandora. Elena Wang, surviving her husband by less than a year, had not lived long enough to make serious changes in the Wang holdings. So there was Karine Ale, beautiful and powerful and with the right words for any occasion.
Delighted to have you with us, Islander Bushka.
How warm and inviting she had sounded.
She was just being polite, diplomatic.
Another burst of activity rippled through the workers at the console in sound control. The screen showing the surface emitted a series of brilliant flickers, and the view was replaced by the face of Simone Roxack, the chaplain psychiatrist. The background revealed that she spoke from her quarters at the center of Vachon, far away on the surface.
I greet you in the name of Ship.
A barely suppressed snort came from Gallo. Bushka noted a shudder pass through the man's classic body at the sight of the CP. Bushka, accustomed to islander variations, had never made note of Roxack's appearance. Now, however, he saw her through Gallo's eyes. Roxack's silvery hair flared in a wild mane from the top of her almost perfectly round head. Her albino eyes projected at the tips of small protuberances on her brows. Her mouth, barely visible under a flap of gray skin, was a small red slit abandoned without a chin. A sharp angle of flesh went directly back from beneath her mouth to her thick neck.
Let us pray, the CP said. This prayer I uttered just a few minutes ago in the presence of Vata. I repeat it now.
She cleared her throat.
Ship, by whose omnipotence we were cast upon Pandora's endless waters, grant us forgiveness from original sin. Grant us...
Bushka tuned her out. He had heard this prayer, in one version or another, many times. Doubtless his companions had heard it, too. The Mermen observers fidgeted at their stations and looked bored.
Original sin.
Bushka's historical studies had made him a questioner of tradition. Mermen, he had discovered, thought original sin referred to the killing of Pandora's sentient kelp. It was their penance that they must rediscover the kelp in their own genes and fill the sea once more with submerged jungles of gigantic stems and fronds. Not sentient this time, however, merely kelp, and controlled by mermen. The fanatical worshippers of Guemes Island, or Guemes Island, it's Guemes. Guemes. If anyone has any input, we'll figure it out. Guemes it is. The fanatical worshippers of Guemes Island, on the other hand, insisted that original sin came when humankind abandoned worship. Most islanders, though, followed the CP's lead. Original sin was that line of bioengineering chosen by Jesus Lewis, the long-dead mastermind behind today's variations in the human norm. Lewis had created the clones and selected others reformed to fit them for survival on Pandora. Let me reread that sentence because there's a big quote unquote. Lewis had created the clones and, quote, selected others reformed to fit them for survival on Pandora, unquote. Bushka shook his head as the CP's voice droned on. Who is surviving best on Pandora? He asked himself. Mermen. Normal humans. At least 10 times as many mermen as islanders survived on Pandora. It was a simple function of available living space. Under the sea, cushioned from Pandora's vagaries, there was a far greater volume of living space than on Pandora's turbulent, dangerous surface. Into ship's realm I commend you, the CP said. Let the blessing of ship accompany this venture. Let ship know that we mean no blasphemy by intruding ourselves into the heavens. Let this be a gesture that brings us closer to ship. The CP's face vanished from the screen, replaced by a close-up of the launch tube's base. Telltales on the tube tipped left to a slow current. At the console to Bushka's left, the launch director said, Condition green. From the pre-launch briefing, Bushka knew that this meant that they were ready to release the sonde. He glanced at another of the screens, a view transmitted down a communications cable from a gyro-stabilized platform on the surface. White froth whipped the tops of long swells up there. Bushka's practiced eye said it was a 40-click wind, practically a calm on Pandora. The Zond would drift fast when it broached, but would climb fast too, and the upper atmosphere, for a change, showed breaks in the clouds, with one of Pandora's 2 suns tipping the cloud edges a glowing silver. The launch director leaned forward to study an instrument. 40 seconds, he said. Bushka moved forward, giving himself a better view of the instruments and the launch director. The man had been introduced as Dark Peniel. Shadow to my friends. No overt rejection there, just a touch of the specialist's resentment that observers could be brought into his working space without his permission. Bushka's mute-sensitive genes had detected immediately that Peniel carried kelp genes, but was fortunate by Pandoran standards because he was not hairless. Peniel wore his long black hair in a single braid. A family style, he had said in an answer to Bushka's question. Peniel displayed a countenance distinctly merman normal. The kelp telltale lay chiefly in his dark skin with its unmistakable undertone of green. He had a narrow, rather sharp-featured face with high planes on both his cheeks and his nose. Peniel's large brown eyes looked out with a deep sense of intelligence beneath straight brows. The mouth was set in a straight line to match the brows, and his lower lip was fuller than the upper. A deep crease rolled from beneath his lips to the cleft of a narrow, well-defined chin. Peniel's body was compact, with the smooth muscles common to mermen who lived much in the sea. The name Peniel had aroused a historian's interest in Bushka. Peniel's ancestry had been instrumental in human survival during the Clone Wars and after the departure of ship. It was a famous name in the histories. Launch, Peniel said. Bushka glanced out the plaz beside him. The launch tube climbed beyond his vision through the green water with a backdrop of sparsely planted kelp. Thick red-brown trunks with glistening highlights at odd intervals. The highlights wavered and blinked as though in agitation. Bushka turned his attention to the screens, expecting something spectacular. The display on which the others focused showed only the slow upward drift of the LTA within the tube. Brilliant lights in the tube wall marked the ascent. The wrinkled bag of the LTA expanded as it lifted, smoothing finally in an orange expanse of the fabric that contained the hydrogen. There, Ale spoke in a sighing voice as the sonde cleared the top of the tube. It drifted slantwise in a sea current, followed by a camera mounted on a Mermen sub.
Test key monitors,
Panil said. A large screen at the center of the console shifted from a tracking view to a transmission from the sonde package trailing beneath the hydrogen bag. The screen showed a slanted green-tinged view of the sea bottom, thin plantations of kelp, a rocky outcrop. They dimmed away into murkiness as Bushka watched. A screen at the upper right of the console shifted to the surface platform's camera, a gyro-stabilized float. The camera swept to the left in a dizzying arc, then settled on an expanse of wind-frothed swells. A pain in his chest told Bushka that he was holding his breath, waiting for the LTA to break the surface. He exhaled and took a deep breath. There! A bubble lifted on the ocean's surface and did not break. Wind flattened the near side of the bag. It lifted free of the water, receding fast as the sonde package cleared. The surface camera tracked it, showing an orange blossom floating in a blue bowl of sky. The view zoomed in to the dangling package from which water still dripped in a wind-driven spray. Bushka looked to the center screen, the transmission from the sonde. It showed the sea beneath the LTA, an oddly flattened scene with little sense of the heaving waves from which the LTA had recently emerged. Is this all? Bushka wondered. He felt let down. He rubbed his thick neck, feeling the nervous perspiration there. A surreptitious glance at the two Mermen observers showed them chatting quietly, with only an occasional glance at the screens and the plas porthole that revealed Mermen already cleaning up after the launch. Frustration and jealousy warred for dominance in Bushka. He stared at the console where Panil was giving low-voiced orders to his operators. How rich these Mermen were! Bushka thought of the crude organic computers with which islanders contented, the stench of the islands, the crowding, and the life-protecting watch that had to be kept on every tiny bit of energy. Islanders paupered themselves for a few radios, satellite navigation receivers, and sonar. And just look at this sonde control! So casually rich. If islanders could afford such riches, Bushka knew the possessions would be kept secret. Display of wealth set people apart in a society that depended ultimately on singleness of all efforts. Islanders believed tools were to be used. Ownership was acknowledged, but a tool left idle could be picked up for use by anyone, any time.
there's a willy-nilly,
Gallo said. Bushka bridled. He knew Mermen called islands willy-nillys. Islands drifted unguided, and this was the Mermen way of sneering at such uncontrolled wandering. That's Vashon, Ale said. Bushka nodded. There was no mistaking his home island. The organic floating metropolis had a distinctive shape known to all of its inhabitants. Vashon, largest of all Pandora's islands.
willy-nilly, Gallo repeated. I should imagine they don't know where they are half the time.
You're not being very polite to our guest, Gellar, Ale said.
The truth is often impolite,
Gallo said. He directed an empty smile at Bushka.
I've noticed that islanders have few goals, that they're not very concerned about getting there.
He's right, damn him, Bushka thought. The drifting pattern had seated itself deeply in the islander psyche. When Bushka did not respond, Ale spoke defensively. Islanders are necessarily more weather-oriented, more tuned to the horizon. That should not be surprising. She glanced questioningly at Bushka. All people are shaped by their surroundings. Isn't that true, Islander Bushka? Islanders believe the manner of our passage is just as important as where we are, Bushka said. He knew his response sounded weak. He turned toward the screens. Two of them now showed transmissions from the sonde. One pointed backwards to the stabilized camera platform on the surface. It showed the platform being withdrawn into the safety of the calm undersea. The other sonde view tracked the drift path. Full in this view lay the bulk of Vachon. Bushka swallowed as he stared at his home island. He had never before seen this view of it. A glance at the altitude repeater below the screen said the view was from 80,000 meters. The amplified image almost filled the screen. Grid lines superimposed on the screen gave the island's long dimension at nearly 30 clicks and slightly less than that across. Vachon was a gigantic oval drifter with irregular edges. Bushka identified the bay indentation where fishboats and subs docked. Only a few of the boats in Vachon's fleet could be seen in the protected waters.
What's its population?
Gallo asked. About 600,000, I believe, Ale said. Bushka scowled, thinking of the crowded conditions this number represented, comparing it with the spaciousness of Mermen habitats. Vachon squeezed more than 2,000 people into every square click, a space more correctly measured in cubic terms. Cubbies were stacked on cubbies high above the water and deep beneath it. And some of the smaller islands were even more condensed, a crowding that had to be experienced to be believed. Space opened on them only when they began to run out of energy. Dead space. Uninhabitable. Like people, organics rotted when they died. A dead island was just a gigantic floating carcass. And this had happened many times.
I could not tolerate such crowding, Gallo said. I could only leave.
It isn't all bad, Bushka blurted. We may live close, but we help each other.
I should certainly hope so,
Gallo snorted. He turned until he was facing Bushka.
What is your personal background, Bushka?
Bushka stared at him, momentarily affronted. This was not an islander question. Islanders knew the backgrounds of their friends and acquaintances, but the rules of privacy seldom permitted probing.
Your working background,
Gallo persisted. Ale put a hand on Gallo's arm. To an islander, such questions are usually impolite, she said.
It's all right, Bushka said. When I got old enough, Mermen, Gallo, I was a wave watcher.
A sort of lookout to warn of wave walls, Ale explained.
I know the term, Gallo said. And after that?
Well, I had good eyes and a good sense of distance, so I did my time as a drift watch and later in the subs. Then, as I showed navigational ability, they trained me as a timekeeper.
Timekeeper, yes, Gallo said. You're the ones who dead reckon an island's position. Not very accurate, I'm told.
Accurate enough,
Bushka said. Gallo chuckled.
Is it true, Islander Bushka, that you people think we Mermen stole the kelp's soul?
Galar! Ale snapped.
No, let him answer, Gallo said. I've been hearing recently about the fundamentalist beliefs of islands such as Güemes.
You're impossible, Galar, Ale said.
I have an insatiable curiosity, Gallo said. What about it, Bushka?
Bushka knew he had to answer, but his voice was dismayingly loud when he responded.
Many islanders believe ship will return to forgive us.
And when will that be?
Gallo asked.
When we regain the collective consciousness.
Ah, the old transition stories,
Gallo sneered.
Do you believe this?
My hobby is history, Bushka said. I believe something important happened to human consciousness during the Clone Wars.
Hobby?
Gallo asked. Historian is not a fully accredited islander job, Ale explained. Superfluous.
I see. Do go on, Bushka.
Bushka clenched his fists and fought down his anger. Gallo was more than self-important. He was truly important, vital to Bushka's hopes.
I don't believe we stole the kelp's soul, Bushka said.
Good for you.
Gallo really smiled this time.
But I do believe, Bushka added, that our ancestors, possibly with kelp assistance, glimpsed a different kind of consciousness, a momentary linkage between all of the minds alive at that time.
Gallo passed a hand across his mouth, an oddly furtive gesture.
The accounts appear to agree, he said, but can they be trusted?
There's no doubt we have kelp genes in the human gene pool, Bushka said. He glanced across the control room at Peniel, who was watching him intently.
And who knows what may happen if we revive the kelp to consciousness, eh?
Gallo asked.
Something like that,
Bushka agreed.
Why do you think Ship abandoned us here?
Galar, please, Ale interrupted.
Let him answer, Gallo said. This islander has an active mind. He may be someone we need.
Bushka tried to swallow in a suddenly dry throat. Was this all a test? Was Gallo actually screening him for entry into Mermen society?
I was hoping.
Again, Bushka tried to swallow.
I mean, as long as I'm down here anyway, I was hoping I might gain access to the material Mermen recovered from the old redoubt. Perhaps the answer to your question.
He broke off. An abrupt silence settled over the room. Ale and Gallo exchanged an oddly veiled look.
How interesting, Gallo said.
I'm told, Bushka said, that when you recovered the redoubt's database,
He coughed.
Our historians work full-time, Gallo said. After the disaster, everything, including the material from the redoubt, was subjected to exhaustive analysis.
I would still like to see the material,
Bushka said. He cursed himself silently. His voice sounded so plaintive.
Tell me, Bushka, Gallo said, what would be your response if this material revealed that Ship was an artifact made by human beings and not God at all?
Bushka pursed his lips.
The artifact heresy? Hasn't that been...
You haven't answered my question,
Gallo said.
I would have to see the material and judge for myself,
Bushka said. He held himself quite still. No islander had ever been granted access to redoubt data. But what Gallo hinted... explosive.
I should be most interested to hear what an islander historian has to say about the redoubt accounts, Gallo said.
He glanced at Ale.
Do you see any reason why we shouldn't grant his request, Karine?
She shrugged and turned away, an expression on her face that Bushka could not interpret. Disgust? Gallo directed that measuring smile toward Bushka.
I quite understand that the redoubt has mystical implications for islanders. I hesitate to feed superstitions.
Mystical?
Bushka thought. Land that once had protruded from the sea. A place built on a continent, a mass of exposed land that did not drift, the last place inundated in the disaster. Mystical? Was Gallo merely toying with him?
I'm a qualified historian,
Bushka said. But you said hobby. Gallo shook his head.
Was everything recovered intact from the redoubt?
Bushka ventured. It was sealed off, Ale said, turning once more to face Bushka. Our ancestors put an air bell on it before cutting through the plasteel.
Everything was found just as it was left when they abandoned the place, Gallo said.
Then it's true, Bushka breathed.
But would you reinforce islander superstitions? Gallo insisted.
Bushka drew himself up stiffly.
I am a scientist. I would reinforce nothing but the truth.
Why this sudden interest in the redoubt? Ale asked.
Sudden?
Bushka stared at her in amazement.
We've always wanted to share in the redoubt's database. The people who left it there were our ancestors, too.
In a manner of speaking,
Gallo said. Bushka felt the hot flush of blood in his cheeks. Most mermen believed that only clones and mutants had populated the drifting islands. Did Gallo really accept that nonsense? Perhaps I should have said why the renewed interest. Let's reread that because I just don't know what I was doing with the rhythm there. Perhaps I should have said why the renewed interest? Ale corrected herself.
We've heard stories, you see, about the Gwimiz movement,
Gallo said. Bushka nodded. Worship was, indeed, on the increase among islanders.
There have been reports of unidentified things seen in the sky, Bushka said. Some believe that ship already has returned and is concealed from us in space.
Do you believe this? Gallo asked.
It's possible, Bushka admitted. All I really know for certain is that the CP is kept busy examining people who claim to have seen visions.
Gallo chuckled. Oh my! Bushka once more felt frustration. They were toying with him. This was all a cruel merman game.
What is so amusing?
He demanded. Galar, stop this, Ale said. Gallo held up an admonitory hand. Kareen, look with care upon Islander Bushka. Could he not pass as one of us? Ale swept a swift glance across Bushka's face and returned her attention to Gallo. What are you doing, Galar? Bushka inhaled deeply and held his breath. Gallo studied Bushka a moment, then, what would be your response, Bushka, if I were to offer you a place in Mermen society? Bushka exhaled slowly, inhaled.
I would accept. Gratefully, of course.
Of course.
Gallo echoed. He smiled at Ale. Then, since Bushka will be one of us, there's no harm in telling him what amuses me. It's on your head, Galar, Ale said. A movement at the sound control console caught Bushka's attention. Peniel was no longer looking at him, but the set of his shoulders told Bushka the man was listening intently. Ships save them. Was the artifact heresy true after all? Was that the great Merman secret? These visions causing so much trouble for our beloved CP, Gallo said. They are Merman rockets, Bushka. Bushka opened his mouth and closed it without speaking. Ship was not God, is not God, Gallo said. The redoubt records are open to several interpretations, Ale said. Only to fools, Gallo snapped. We are sending up rockets, Bushka, because we are preparing to recover the Hybe tanks from orbit. Ship was an artifact made by our ancestors. Other artifacts and things have been left in space for us to recover. The matter-of-fact way Gallo said this made Bushka catch his breath. Stories about the mysterious Hybe tanks permeated Islander society. What might be stored in those containers that orbited Pandora? Recovering those tanks and really seeing what they contained was worth anything, even destruction of the ship god belief that sustained so many people. You are shocked, Gallo said. I'm awed, Bushka replied. We were all raised on the transition stories. Gallo pointed upward. Life awaits us up there. Bushka nodded.
The tanks are supposed to contain countless life forms from Earth.
Fish, animals, plants, Gallo said, and even some humans. He grinned. Normal humans. He waved a hand to encompass the occupants of sound control. Like us. Bushka inhaled a trembling breath. Yes, the historical accounts said the Hybe tanks held humans who had never been touched by the bioengineering machinations of Jesus Lewis. There would be people in those tanks who had gone to sleep in another star system, who had no idea of this nightmare world that awaited their awakening. And now you know, Gallo said. Bushka cleared his throat.
We had never suspected. I mean, the CP has never said a word about.
The CP does not know of this, Ale said. There was a warning note in her voice. Bushka glanced at the Plaz porthole with its view of the LTA tube. She knows about that, of course, Ale said. An innocuous thing, Gallo said. There has been no blessing of our rockets, Ale said. Bushka continued to stare out the porthole. He had never counted himself a deeply religious person, but these Merman revelations left him profoundly disturbed. Ale obviously doubted Gallo's interpretation of the redoubt material, but still, a blessing would be only common sense, just in case. What is your response, Mermen Bushka? Gallo asked.
Mermen Bushka.
Bushka turned a wide-eyed stare on Gallo, who obviously awaited an answer to a question. A question. What had he asked? Bushka was a moment recovering the man's words.
My response, yes, the islanders, about these rockets. The islanders, shouldn't they be told?
They? Gallo laughed, a deep amusement that shook his beautiful body. You see, Kareem? Already his former compatriots are they. We're going to learn more about Gilar Gallo, and not a single thing you learn about him is going to make him a more likable individual. Minor spoilers. He is possibly the worst. Where are we? Oh yeah, we're good. Incidentally, thanks to everyone who's tuning in. I see you sending messages. We'll get to that. The touch of the infant teaches birth, and our hands are witness to the lesson. Caro Panil, The Histories. Vata did not experience true consciousness. She skirted the shadow edges of awareness. Memories flitted through her neurons like tendrils from the kelp. Sometimes she dreamed kelp dreams. These dreams often included a wondrous hatch of highlighters, spore-filled gas bags that had died when the original kelp died. Tears mixed with her nutrient bath as she dreamed such things, tears for the fate of those huge sky-bound globes tacking across the evening breezes of a million years. Her dream highlighters clutched their ballast rocks in their two longest tentacles, and Vata felt the comforting texture of rock hugged close. Thoughts themselves were like highlighters to her, or silken threads blowing in the dark of her mind. Sometimes she followed awareness of Duque, who floated beside her, sensing events within his thoughts. Time and again she re-experienced through him that terrible night when the gravitational wrenching of Pandora's two suns destroyed the last human foothold on the planet's fragile land. Duque repeatedly let his thoughts plunge into that experience. And Vata, linked to the fearful mutant like mermen driving. Oh, sorry. And Vata, linked to the fearful mutant like. Oh, gosh. Okay. My brain didn't refuse to read that sentence correctly. Give me a sec. I gotta sound it out. I'm pretty sure I understand it, but let's. And Vata, linked to the fearful mutant. Linked to the. Okay, Duque is the fearful mutant. I had the subject wrong. Okay. And Vata, linked to the fearful mutant like mermen diving partners on the same safety line, was forced to recreate dreams that soothed and calmed Duque's terrors. Duque escaped, she muttered in his mind. Duque was taken away onto the sea, where Halley Echo tended his burns. Duque would snuffle and whimper. Had Vata been conscious, she would have heard with her own ears, because Vata and Duque shared the same life support at the center of Vachon. Vata lay mostly submerged in nutrient, a monstrous mound of pink and blue flesh with definite human female characteristics. Enormous breasts with gigantic pink nipples lifted from the dark nutrient like twin mountains from a brown sea. Duque drifted beside her, a satellite, her familiar dangling in the endless mental vacuum. For generations now, the two of them had been nurtured and reverenced in Vachon's central complex, home of the chaplain psychiatrist and the Committee on Vital Forms. Mermen and Islander guards kept watch on the pair under the command of the CP. It was a ritualized observation, which, in time, eroded the awe that Pandorans learned early from the reactions of their parents.
The two of them there like that. They'll always be there. They're our last link with Ship. As long as they live, Ship is with us. Its warship keeps them alive so long.
Oh, sorry, that's not a possessive it's.
Its warship keeps them alive so long.
Although Duque occasionally knuckled an eye into glaring wakefulness and watched his guardians in the gloomy surroundings of the living pool that confined them, Vata's responses never lifted to consciousness. She breathed. Her great body, responding to the kelp half of her genetic inheritance, absorbed energy from the nutrient solution that washed against her skin. Analysis of the nutrient betrayed traces of human waste products, which were removed by the sucker mouths of blind scrubberfish. Occasionally, Vata would snort and an arm would lift in the nutrient like a leviathan rising from its depths, before settling once more into the murk. Her hair continued to grow until it spread like kelp across the nutrient surface, tangling over the hairless skin of Duque and impeding the scrubberfish. The CP would come into the chamber, then, and, with a reverence touched by a certain amount of cupidity, would clip Vata's locks. The strands were washed and separated to be blessed and sold in short lengths as indulgences. Even Mermen bought them. Sale of Vata hair had been the major source of CP income for many generations. Duque, more aware than any other human of his curious link with Vata, puzzled over the connection when Vata's intrusions left him with thinking time of his own. Sometimes he would speak of this to his guardians, but when Duque spoke there was always a kind of flurry of activity. But when Duque spoke there was always a flurry of activity, the summoning of the CP, and a different kind of watchfulness from the security. "She lives me," he said once, and this became a token label inscribed on the Vata hair containers. In these speaking times the CP would try prepared questions, sometimes booming them at Duque, sometimes asking in a low and reverential voice. "Do you speak for Vata, Duque?" "I speak." That was all they ever got from him on this question. Since it was known that Duque was one of the 100 or so original mutants who had been conceived with kelp intervention and thus bore kelp genes, they would sometimes ask him about the kelp that had once ruled Pandora's now endless sea. "Do you have memory of the kelp, Duque?" "Havata," Duque corrected. "I am the rock." Interminable arguments came out of this answer. Avata had been the kelp's name for itself. The reference to rock gave scholars and theologians room for speculation.
"He must mean that his consciousness exists at the bottom of the sea where the kelp lives." "No! Remember how the kelp always clung to a rock, lifting its tendrils to the sunlight, and the highlighters used rock for ballast." "You're all wrong. He's Vata's grip on life. He's Vata's rock."
And there was always someone who would hearken back to Warship and the stories of that distant planet where someone calling himself Peter had given the same answer Duque had given. Nothing was ever solved by such arguments, but the questioning continued whenever Duque showed signs of wakefulness.
"How is it that you and Vata do not die, Duque?"
"We wait."
For what do you wait?"
"No answer." This recurrent response precipitated several crises until the CP of that time issued an order that Duque's answers could only be broadcast by permission of the CP. This didn't stop the quiet whispering and the rumors, of course, but it relegated everything except the CP's official version to the role of mystical heresy. It was a question no CP had asked for 2 generations now. Current interest centered much more on the kelp that Mermen spread far and wide in Pandora's planetary sea. The kelp was thick and healthy, but showed no signs of acquiring consciousness. As the great islands drifted, they were seldom out of sight of a horizon touched by the oily green flatness of a kelp bed. Everyone said it was a good thing. Kelp formed nurseries for fish, and everyone could see there were more fish these days, though they weren't always easy to catch. You couldn't use a net amongst the kelp. Baited lines tangled in the huge fronds and were lost. Even the dumb Murray had learned to retreat into kelp sanctuary at the approach of fishermen. There was also the recurrent question of Ship. Ship, who was God and who had left humankind on Pandora. Why did Ship abandon us here, Duque? All Duque would ever say was, Ask Ship. Many a CP had engaged in much silent prayer over that one, but Ship did not answer them, at least not with any voice that they could hear. It was a vexing question. Would Ship return? Ship had left the hive tanks in orbit around Pandora. It was a strange orbit, seeming to defy the gravitational index for such things. There were those among Pandora's mermen and islanders who said Vata waited for the hive tanks to be brought down, that she would awaken when this occurred. No one doubted there was some link between Duque and Vata, so why not a link between Vata and the dormant life waiting up there in the tanks?
How are you linked to Vata? A CP asked.
How are you linked to me? Duque responded. This was duly recorded in the Book of Duque, and more arguments ensued. It was noted, however, that whenever such questions were asked, Vata stirred, sometimes grossly, and sometimes with only the faintest movement over her vast flesh.
It's like the safety line we use between divers down under, an astute merman observed. You can always find your partner.
Vata's tendril awareness stirred to the linkage with genetic memories of mountain climbers. They were climbing, she and Duque. This she showed him many times. Her memories, shared with Duque, showed a spectacular world of the vertical that islanders could barely imagine, and Holos did not do justice. Only she did not think of herself as one of the climbers, or even think of herself at all. There was only the line and the climbing.
First, we had to develop a landless lifestyle. Second, we preserved what technology and hardware we could salvage. Lewis left us with a team of bioengineers, both our curse and our most powerful legacy. We do not dare plunge our few precious children into a stone age.
Hallie Eckel, The Journals. Ward Keel looked down from the high bench and surveyed the two young petitioners in front of him. The male was a large merman with the tattoo of a criminal on his brow, a wine-red E for expatriate. This merman could never return to the rich land under the sea, and he knew the islanders accepted him only for his stabilizing genes. Those genes had not stabilized this time. The merman probably knew what the judgment would be. He patted a damp cloth nervously over his exposed skin. The woman petitioner, his mate, was small and slender, with pale blonde hair and two slight indentations where she should have had eyes. She wore a long blue sari, and when she walked Keel did not hear steps, only a rasping scrape. She swayed from side to side and hummed to herself.
Why does this one have to be the first case of the morning?
Keel wondered. It was a perverse fate.
This morning of all mornings.
Our child deserves to live, the merman said. His voice boomed in the chambers. The Committee on Vital Forms often heard such loud protestation, but this time Keel felt that the volume was directed at the woman, telling her that her mate fought for them both. As Chief Justice of the Committee, it was too often Keel's lot to perform that unsavory stroke of the pen, to speak directly the unutterable fears of the petitioners themselves. Many times it was otherwise, and then this chamber echoed the laughter of life. But today, in this case, there would be no laughter. Keel sighed. The Mermen, even though a criminal by Mermen ruling, made this matter politically sensitive. Mermen were jealous of the births that they called normal, and they monitored every topside birth involving Mermen parentage. "We have studied your petition with great care," Keel said. He glanced left and right at his fellow committee members. They sat impassively, attention elsewhere, on the great curve of bubbly ceiling, on the soft living deck, on the records stacked in front of them, everywhere but on the petitioners. The dirty work was being left to Ward Keel. If they only knew, Keel thought. A higher committee on vital forms has today passed judgment on me, as it will pass judgment on them eventually. He felt a deep compassion for the petitioners in front of him, but there was no denying the judgment. The committee has determined that the subject, not the child, he thought, is merely a modified gastrula. "We want this child!" The man fisted the rail that separated him from the committee's high bench. The security guardians at the rear of the chambers came to attention. The woman continued to hum and sway, not in time with the music that came from her lips. Keel leafed through a stack of Plas records and pulled out a sheet thick with figures and graphs. "The subject has been found to have a nuclear construction that harbors a reagent gene," he reported. "This construction ensures that the cellular material will turn on itself, destroying its own cell walls." "Then let us have our child until that death," the man blurted. He swiped at his face with the damp cloth. "For the love of humanity, give us that much!" "Sir," Keel said, "for the love of humanity, I cannot. We have determined that this construction is communicable should there be any major viral invasion of the subject." "Our child! Not a subject! Our child!" "Enough!" Keel snapped. Security moved silently into the aisle behind the Mermen. Keel tapped the bell beside him, and all stirring in the chamber ceased. "We are sworn to protect human life, to perpetuate life forms that are not lethal deviants." The Merman father stared upward, awed at the invocation of these terrible powers. Even his mate stopped her gentle swaying, but a faint hum still issued from her mouth. Keel wanted to shout down at them, "I am dying right here in front of you! I am dying!" But he bit back the impulse and decided that if he were going to give in to hysteria, he'd do it in his own quarters. Instead, he said, "We are empowered to carry out measures in the extreme to see that humankind survives this genetic mess we inherited from Jesus Lewis." He leaned back and steadied the shaking in his hands and voice. "We are in no way refreshed by a negative decision. Take your woman home. Care for her." "I want one." The bell rang again, cutting the man short. Keel raised his voice. "Usher, see these people out. They will be given the usual priorities. Terminate the subject, retaining all materials as stated in Vital Form Orders, subparagraph B. Recess." Keel arose and swept past the other committee members without a glance at the rest of the chambers. The grunts and struggles of the heart-sick Mermen echoed and re-echoed down the corridors of Keel's anguished mind. As soon as he was alone in his office, Keel unstoppered a small flask of boo and poured himself a stiff shot. He tossed it back, shuddered, and caught his breath as the clear, warm liquid eased into his bloodstream. He sat in the special chair at his desk then, eyes closed, and rested his long, thin neck against the molded supports that took the weight of his massive head. He could not make a lethal decision as he had done this morning without recalling the moment when he, as an infant, had come before the Committee on Vital Forms. People said it was not possible for him to remember that scene, but he did remember it. not in bits and sketches, but in its entirety. His memory went back into the womb, through a calm birth into a gloomy delivery room and the glad awakening at his mother's breast. And he remembered the judgment of the committee. They had been worried about the size of his head and the length of his thin neck. Would prosthetics compensate? He had understood the words, too. There was language in him from some genetic well, and although he could not speak until growth caught up with what had been born in him, he knew those words. "This infant is unique," that old Chief Justice had said, reading from the medical report. "His intestines must have periodic implantation of a remora to supply missing bile and enzyme factors." The Chief Justice had looked down then, a giant behind that enormous and remote bench, and his gaze had fixed on the naked infant in its mother's arms. "Legs thick and stubby, feet deformed, one joint toes, 6 fingers, torso overlong, waist pinched in, face rather small in that." The justice cleared his throat. "Enormous head." The justice had looked at Keel's mother then, noting the extremely wide pelvis. Obvious anatomical questions had lain unspoken in the man's mind. "In spite of these difficulties, this subject is not a lethal deviant." The words issuing from the justice's mouth had all been in the medical report. Keel, when he came to the committee as a member, fished out his own report, reading it with a detached curiosity. "Face rather small." These were the very words in the report, just as he remembered them. "Eyes, one brown and one blue." Keel smiled at the memory. His eyes, one brown and one blue, could peek around from the nearly squared edges of his temples, allowing him to look almost straight back without turning his head. His lashes were long and drooping. When he relaxed, they fuzzed his view of the world. Time had put smile wrinkles at the corners of his wide, thick-lipped mouth. And his flat nose, nearly a hand's breadth, jeez, I don't know why that's giving me trouble, but it is. And his flat nose, nearly a hand's breadth wide, had grown until it stopped just short of his mouth. The whole face, he knew from comparisons, was oddly pinched together, top to bottom, as though put on his head as an afterthought. But those corner-placed eyes, they were the dominant feature. Alert and wise. "They let me live because I looked alert," he thought. This was a thing he, too, sought in the subjects brought before him. Brains. Intelligence. That was what humankind required to get them out of this mess. Brawn and dexterity, too, but these were useless without the intelligence to guide them. Keel closed his eyes and sank his neck even deeper into the cushioned supports. The boo was having its desired effect. He never drank the stuff without thinking how strange it was that this should come from the deadly nerve runners that had terrified his ancestors in the pioneer days of Pandora when real land protruded above the sea. Worm hordes, the first observers had called them. The worm hordes attacked warm life and ate out every nerve cell, working their way to the succulent brain where they insisted their clutches of eggs. Even dashers feared them. Came the endless sea, though, and nerve runners retreated to a subsea vector whose fermentation byproduct was boo, sedative, narcotic, happy juice. He fondled the small glass and took another sip. The door behind him opened, and a familiar footstep entered. Familiar swish of garments, familiar smells. He didn't open his eyes, thinking what a singular mark of trust that was, even for an islander. Or an invitation, he thought. The beginnings of a wry smile touched the corners of his mouth. He felt the tingling of the boo in his tongue and fingertips. Now in his toes. "Baring my neck for the axe." There was always guilt after a negative decision, always at least the unconscious desire for expiation. Well, it was all there in the committee's orders, but he was not fool enough to retreat into that hoary old excuse. I was just obeying orders.
May I get you something, Justice?
The voice was that the voice was that of his aide and sometimes lover, Joy Marco. No, thank you, he murmured. She touched his shoulder.
The committee would like to reconvene in quarters at 1100 hours. Should I tell them you're too...
I'll be there. He kept his eyes closed and heard her start to leave. Joy, he called, have you ever thought how ironic it is that you, with your name, work for this committee? She returned to his side, and he felt her hand on his left arm. It was a trick of the boo that he felt the hand melt into his senses. More than a touch, she caressed a vital core of his being.
Today is particularly hard, she said, but you know how rare that is anymore.
She waited, he presumed, for his response. Then, when none came,
I think Joy is a perfect name for this job. It reminds me of how much I want to make you happy.
he managed a weak smile and adjusted his head in the supports. He couldn't bring himself to tell her about his own medical reports, the final verdict. You do bring me joy, he said. Wake me at 10:45. She dimmed the light when she left. The mobile device that supported his head began to irritate the base of his neck where it pressed into the chair's supports. He inserted a finger under the chair's cushions and adjusted one of the contraption's fastenings. Relief on his left side was transmitted to irritation on the right. He sighed and poured another short dash of boo. When he lifted the slender glass, the dimmed overhead light shot the blue-gray sparkles through the liquid. I don't know how to read. When he lifted the slender glass, the dimmed overhead light shot blue-gray sparkles through the liquid. It looked cool, as refreshing as a supportive bath on a hot day when the double suns burned through the clouds. What warmth the tiny glass contained! He marveled at the curve of his thin fingers around the stem. One fingernail peeled back where he had snagged it on his robe. Joy would clip and bind it when she returned, he knew. He did not doubt that she had noted it. This had happened often enough, though, that she knew it did not pain him. His own reflection in the curvature of the glass caught his attention. The curve exaggerated the wide spacing of his eyes. The long lashes drooping almost to the bend of his cheeks receded into tiny points. He strained to focus on the glass so close in front of him. His nose was a giant thing. He brought the glass to his lips, and the image fuzzed out, vanished. Small wonder that islanders avoid mirrors, he thought. He had a fascination with his own reflection, though, and often caught himself staring at his features in shiny surfaces. That such a distorted creature should be allowed to live. The long-ago judgment of that earlier committee filled him with wonder. Did those committee members know that he would think and hurt and love? He felt that the often shapeless blobs that appeared before his committee bore kinship to all humanity, if only they showed evidence of thought, love, and the terribly human capacity to be hurt. From some dim passageway beyond his doors, or, perhaps, from somewhere deep in his own mind, the soft tones of a fine set of water drums nestled him into his cushions and drowsed him away. Half dreams flickered in and out of his consciousness, becoming presently a particularly soothing full dream of Joy Marco and himself rolling backward on her bed. Her robe fell open to the smooth softness of aroused flesh, and Keel felt the unmistakable stirrings of his body, the body in the chair and the body in the dream. He knew it was a dream of the memory of their first exploratory sharing. His hand slipped beneath her robe and pulled the softness of her against him, stroking her back. That had been the moment when he discovered the secret of Joy's bulky clothes, the clothes that could not hide an occasional firm, trim line of hips or thighs, the small, strong arms. Joy cradled a third breast under her left armpit. In the dream of the memory, she giggled nervously as his wandering hand found the tiny nipple hardening between his fingers. Mr. Justice. It was Joy's voice, but it was wrong. That was not what she said. Mr. Justice. A hand shook his left arm. He felt the chair and the prosthetics, a pain where his neck joined the massive head. Ward, it's wake up. The committee meets in 15 minutes. He blinked awake. Joy stood over him, smiling, her hand still on his arm. Nodded off, he said. Nodded off. He yawned behind his hand. I was dreaming about you. A distinctive flush darkened her cheeks. Something nice, I hope. He smiled. How could a dream with you in it be anything but nice? The blush deepened, and her gray eyes glittered. Flattery will get you anything, Mr. Justice. She patted his arm. After committee, you have a call to Kareen Ale. Her office said she would arrive here at 13:30. I told them you have a full appointment sheet through... Unless that's supposed to be though. I told them you have a full appointment sheet, though. I'll see her, he said. He stood and steadied himself on the edge of his desk console. The boo always made him a little groggy at first recovery. Imagine the medics giving him their death sentence and then telling him to knock off the boo. Avoid extremes. Avoid anxiety. Kareen Ale takes advantage of her position to presume on your good nature and waste your time, Joy said. Keel didn't like the way Joy exaggerated the Mermen ambassador's name. Ale. So, brief interjection here. This is kind of in the same pool as we don't learn how Jesus Lewis's name is pronounced until super late. This is slightly less egregious in the sense that the first time we see Kareen Ale's name is... where? How many pages in? Nope, that's Queet's Twisp. It's not that far ago. Here's the chapter. Galar Gallo, Kareen Ale. It's spelled ale, A-L-E, like either alewife or swilling ale, quaffing ale, A-L-E. And we learned that on page 22 of the book. And it is not for 24 more pages that we learn how it's pronounced. And they throw Kareen Ale as a name at us, oh gosh, 1, 2, 3, 4, lots of times, dozens of times before now. So pretty much doing the same kind of ha ha ha, I'm sort of having fun at the reader's expense, informing them how something is pronounced late to see if they're paying attention. Though Jesus Lewis's, I think I think we don't learn that for, it's greater than that amount of time. I think it's more like 40 to 50 pages. Or 100. It's wild. Anyway. Keel didn't like the way Joy exaggerated the Mermen ambassador's name. Ale. True, it was a difficult name to carry through the cocktail parties of the diplomatic corps, but the woman had Keel's complete respect on the debating floor. He was suddenly aware that Joy was leaving. Joy, he called, allow me to cook for you in quarters tonight. Her back straightened in the doorway when she turned to face him, and she smiled. I'd like that very much. What time? 1900. She nodded once, firmly, and left. It was just the economy of movement and grace that endeared her to him. She was less than half his age, but she carried a wisdom about her that age ignored. He tried to remember how long it had been since he'd taken a full-time lover. 12 years? No, 13. Joy made the wait that much more right in his mind. Her body was supple and completely hairless, something that excited him in ways he'd thought he'd forgotten. He sighed and tried to get his mind set for the coming meeting with the committee. Old fart, he thought. One corner of his mouth twisted up in spite of himself. Well, they're pretty interesting old farts. The 5 committee members were among the most powerful people on Vachon. Only one person rivaled Keel with his position as Chief Justice. Simone Roxack, the chaplain psychiatrist, who commanded great popular support and provided a check on the power of the committee. Simone could move things by inference and innuendo. Keel could order them done, and they were done. Keel realized with some curiosity that as well as he knew the committee members, he always had trouble remembering their faces. Well, faces were not all that important. It was what lay behind the face that mattered. He touched a finger to his nose, to his distended forehead, and as though it were a magic gesture, his hand called up a clear image of those other faces, those 4 old justices. There was Allon, the youngest of them at 67. Allon Matz, Vachon's leading bioengineer for nearly 30 years. Theodore Carp was the cynic of the group, and, so Keel thought, aptly named. Others referred to Carp as Fishman, a product of both his appearance and his bearing. Carp looked fish-like. A sickly pale, nearly translucent skin covered the long, narrow face and blunt-fingered hands. The cuffs of his robe came nearly to the tips of his fingers, and his hands appeared quite fin-like at first glance. His lips were full and wide, and they never smiled. He had never been considered seriously for Chief Justice. Not a political enough animal, Keel thought. No matter how bad things get, you've got to smile sometime. He shook his head and chuckled to himself. Maybe that should be one of the committee's criteria for passing questionable subjects, the ability to smile, to laugh.
Wood, a voice called, I swear you'll daydream your life away.
He turned and saw the other 2 justices walking the hallway behind him. Had he passed them in the hatchway and not noticed? Possibly. Caroline, he said, and nodded. And Gwyn. Yes, with luck I will daydream my life away. Are you refreshed after this morning's session? Caroline Bluelove turned her eyeless face up to his and sighed.
A difficult morning, she said. Clear-cut, of course, but difficult. I don't see why you go through a hearing, Ward,
Gwyn Airdstep said.
You just make yourself uncomfortable. It makes us all uncomfortable. We shouldn't have to whip ourselves over something like that. Can't we channel the drama outside the chambers?
They have their right to be heard, and the right to hear something as irreversible as our decision from those who make it, he said. Otherwise, what might we become? The power over life and death is an awesome one, and it should have all the checks against it that we can muster. That's one decision that should never be easy.
So what are we? Gwyn persisted.
So what are we? Gwyn persisted.
Gods,
Caroline snapped. She put her hand on Keel's arm and said,
Walk these 2 doddering old gods to chambers, will you, Mr. Justice?
Delighted, he said. They scuffed down the hallway, their bare feet hardly more than sighs on the soft deck. Ahead of them, a team of slurry workers painted nutrient on the walls. This team used broad brushes and laid on vivid strokes of deep blue, yellow, and green. In a week all the color would be absorbed, and the walls returned to their hungry, gray-brown hue. Gwyn positioned herself behind Keel and Caroline. Her lumbering pace hurried them on. Keel was distracted from Caroline's small talk by the constant lurch of Gwyn's hulk behind them. Do either of my fellow justices know why we're meeting just now? He asked. It must be something disturbing, because Joy didn't reveal it when she told me about the appointment.
That Mermen this morning. He's appealed to the chaplain psychiatrist. Gwyn snorted. Why won't they leave it be?
Curious, Caroline said. It struck Keel as very curious. He had sat the bench for a full 5 years before a case had been appealed to the chaplain psychiatrist. But this year...
The CP is just a figurehead, Gwyn said. Why do they waste their time and ours on...
And hers, Caroline interrupted. It's a lot of work being the emissary to the gods.
Keel shuffled quietly between them while they reopened the ages-old debate. He tuned it out, as he'd learned to do years ago. People filled his life too much to leave any time for gods. Especially now, this day when the life burning inside him had become doubly precious. 8 cases appealed by the CP in this season alone, he thought, and all 8 involved Mermen. The realization made him extremely interested in the afternoon meeting with Karine Ale, which was to follow this appeals hearing. The 3 justices entered the hatchway to their smaller chambers. It was an informational room, small, well lit, the walls lined with books, tapes, holos, and other communications equipment. Mats and the Fishman were already watching Simone Roxack's introductory remarks on the large view screen. She would, of course, use the Vachon intercom. The CP seldom left her quarters near the tank that sustained Vata and Duque. The 4 protrusions that made up most of the CP's face bent and waved as she talked. Her 2 eye protuberances were particularly active. Keel and the others seated themselves quietly. Keel raised the back of his chair to ease the strain on his neck and its support.
And further, that they were not even allowed to view the child. Is that not somewhat harsh treatment from a committee entrusted with the sensitive care of our life forms?
Carp was quick to respond.
It was a gastrula, Simone, purely and simply a lump of cells with a hole in it. There was nothing to be gained by bringing the creature into public view.
The creature's parents hardly constitute a public viewing, Mr. Justice. And don't forget the association of creator and creature. Lest you forget, sir, I am a chaplain psychiatrist. While you may have certain prejudices regarding my religious role, I assure you that my preparation as a psychiatrist is most thorough. When you denied that young couple the sight of their offspring, you denied them a goodbye, a closure, a finality that would help them grieve and get on with their lives. Now there will be counselling, tears, and nightmares far beyond the normal scope of mourning.
Gwyn picked up at the CP's first pause. This doesn't sound like an appeal for the life form in question. Since that is the express function of an appeal, I must ask your intentions here. Is it possible that you're simply trying to go on record as establishing a political platform out of the appeals process? The nodules on the CP's face retracted as if struck, then slowly re-emerged at the ends of their long stalks. A good psychiatrist has a face you can't read, Keel thought. Simone certainly fills the bill. The CP's voice came on again in its wet, slurpy fashion.
I refer to the decision of the Chief Justice in this matter.
So now I have to change her voice.
I refer to the decision of the Chief Justice in this matter.
Ugh. We can do it. She doesn't have a ton of lines, but I have to remember that going forward. Keel snapped, fully awake. This was certainly an unlikely turn of argument, if it was argument. He cleared his throat and gave his full attention to the screen. Those 4 nodules seemed to hunt out the gaze of both his eyes and fix on his mouth at the same time. He cleared his throat again.
Your Eminence, he said, it is clear that we did not proceed with this case in the most sensitive fashion. I speak for the committee when I voice my appreciation for your candid appraisal of the matter. Sometimes, in the anguish of our task, we lose sight of the difficulty imposed upon others. Your censure, for lack of a better word, is noted and will be acted upon. However, Justice Erdstep's point is well made. You dilute the appeals process by bringing before us matters that do not, in fact, constitute an appeal on behalf of a condemned lethal deviant. Do you wish to proceed with such an appeal in this case?
There was a pause from the view screen, then a barely audible sigh.
No, Mr. Justice, I do not. I have seen the reports. In this case, I concur with your findings.
Keel heard the low grumbling from Carp and Gwyn beside him.
Perhaps we should meet formally and discuss these matters, he said. Would that be to your liking, Your Eminence?
The head nodded slightly, and the voice slurped.
Yes, yes, that would be most helpful. I will make arrangements through our offices. Thank you for your time, committee.
The screen went blank before Keel could respond. Amid the mutterings of his colleagues, he found himself wondering,
What the devil is she up to?
he knew that it must deal with the mermen somehow, and the itch between his shoulder blades told him it was more serious than this conversation suggested.
We'll find out how serious soon enough, he thought. If it's bad, the appointment will be for me alone.
Ward Keel had done a little psychiatric study himself, and he was not one to waste a skill. He resolved to be particularly attentive to detail when he met later with Kareen Ale. The CP's intrusion coincided with the Merman ambassador's appointment too well, surely more than coincidence.
Actually, I think I'll cancel the appointment, he thought, and make a few calls. This meeting had best be on my time, on my turf.
And that is where we will leave it for today. Click. Streamboo.com, my goodness. Thank you, Russian bot using incomprehensible ASCII text for a service I will never use because I don't have that much self-loathing in me. Stream Boo, it must be related to this book. How convenient. You can stream Boo from the Nerve Runners. In fact, oh chatbot thing, I hope Nerve Runners fucking get you. Pardon my French. Eating all your nerve endings and laying a clutch of eggs in your brain pan would probably be the surest way to get you to stop. It'd teach you a fucking lesson, all right. Anyway. Let me see how long this chapter is, and I will put the marker there. So yeah, we have begun the great work. That is the book that we're reading, which is the Lazarus Effect. Yes, it is a book. We read it. It's good. It's pretty rad. I'm actually quite fond of it. Uh, I have mentioned that it is a kind of a smaller scale affair. Um, Still dramatic, but the stakes aren't quite as high. You don't have literal God breathing down your neck very directly, saying, hey, by the way, you're on the clock. I will delete this recording, and you with it, sort of thing. Where was I? Right. So yeah, what I'll probably do now that we have a functioning Discord, link is in the stream description as well as the channel description on YouTube. I've got to do the channel description edit on the Twitch side of things. Although I might not. I don't know. I'll decide. Nobody actually watches that. Well, actually, that's not true. Some people do use it, other than chatbots, though they are the most frequent users. What I can do, because I'm unsure of pronunciations on some of these, so what I'll do is I'll write out a little chat blurb that's got like a list of dramatis personae or something, and then with how their names are spelled, as well as like some terms that the series uses, that the book uses. I'll try to do that going forward. I know people have asked after the echopraxia um, recordings. I have those. What I have to do is get them uploaded somewhere, and the problem I've run into is they're really friggin' big because they're video files. When I copied them over, that's what they wound up being. And let's see, I did a zip file of them all together, and it clocks in at, drumroll please, 19.7 gigs. So, this, as you can probably guess, is something of an issue. Part of the difficulty is I don't think I can use a YouTube downloader to get them as MP3 outputs because one of them had to be removed. Actually, let me check on my channel real quick and see. Where's my dashboard? There's content. Videos. Maybe it's under. I don't know. Do I have echopraxia here? Here we go. We have echopraxia. I do have it there.
It is removed, but I might be able to watch it on my own. And if I can watch it on my own, then I might be able to use a YouTube downloader to download it. And if I can use a YouTube downloader to download it, I will give a mouse a cookie. And if you give a mouse a cookie, he will want more cookies. Um, you see where I'm going with this. What I will try to do is I will try to download them all as MP3s, which isn't ideal, but it will shrink their size because 20 gigs is just too much. How big is the proper folder? Did the zip do anything? Yeah, the zip reduced it by a solid almost 50%. Actually, it practically cut it in half. I could re-zip it, but I don't know how much that's going to improve matters. So that's the major barrier I've run into is they're just massive. It's massive files, needlessly ungainly in size. I think these were direct downloads from or direct recordings. I don't think those were downloads. Part of the difficulty, of course, and the reason they're so big is A, they're video files, so they're big anyway. B, they're just long. 2 hours of video, even if nothing's going on screen, except for a solid cover image, it's a lot of data. It adds up very quickly. So if people would rather they be MP3 files to hopefully shrink them, I will try to get that anyway. I'll try to get both available. I don't know how much a Google Drive allows you in terms of wiggle room. Google.com/drive. I have no idea what the actual website name is. The web address. Let's see if this cooperates. Let's try signing in with. That's something. Yeah, it's a 15 gigabyte limit unless I throw money at them, and I'm not throwing money at them. So I would have to have like half of them up and then keep swapping them out, which I could do. It wouldn't even be hard, but it could be done. Yeah. There is not much I can do with this, unfortunately. I'll try and get them as MP3s, see if I can do that, and we'll go from there. Yeah, that's about it. So yeah, if people want to join the Discord, they can. If they don't want to join the Discord, they don't have to. I'm not going to make anyone do anything. I'm not going to make the one thing that I kind of have to make exclusive to that, sadly, is the echopraxia and anything that got zilched for whatever reason, which is nothing really other than that. So unfortunately, you will have to go there to get it because I am uncomfortable putting a link in the YouTube description to it. Because I don't want the account shut down. I have contingencies in case that ever happens, because I'm emotionally prepared for that to occur. Well, mentally prepared for that to occur, but if not emotionally. I'm aware that it could happen because what I'm doing is, frankly, it could be perceived as taking money away from people who actually do audiobooks for a living. I would not make that argument, but I could see it being used. I can understand that argument. I might even agree with it if somebody convinced me and took me out to dinner first and was like, "You have to say this now because I gave you food." I'd be like, "Yeah, okay. I guess I agree with your argument at that point." Anyway, where were we? Right. So yeah, that's kind of where we're at with echopraxia. It's a bit of a barrier. I'm going to see what I can do to alleviate that. Anyway, hopefully people enjoyed. I think it's a pretty cool book. We've got a variety of cover art we're going to get through, which is going to be fun. Next Friday, we'll be reading more of it. This will not go on terribly long. Yeah, 1, 2, 3. It might be closer to 8 installments. I take it back now that I look at it. 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, around 8 probably. Around 8 installments. And then we will get on to, after we get through those, we will do Death's End by Xijin Liu, and after we finish Death's End by Xijin Liu, we get onto the final volume of the Pandora Sequence, The Ascension Factor, which is breakneck. It is very fast-paced. A lot happens in a very short time frame. to the point that it's kind of disorienting, to be honest. So yeah, I'll try and get up a list of character names and some of the terminology used so people can see those written out for ease of use. And yeah, I have to find a list of actual characters. But, I'm not actually sure what a sonde, S-O-N-D-E, is. I'm not totally sure if you pronounce duque as 2 syllables or if it's just one, duke. It could be either way, and I think there's wiggle room for it. Simone Rocksack seems pretty clear cut because her last name is Rocksack. It's rock, then sack together as one word, no hyphen. So hers is pretty easy. Karine Ale is there's no accent over it, over the E. Uh, there's none over Jesus Lewis's name. I don't think it was. I don't know how standard that was back then to make sure you have accents. That would pretty much solve it if you had that as part of your printing process, that there's always accents over things that need them. I don't know how common that was, come to think of it. Thinking on books of this era, I can't remember any off the top of my head that had it, but it doesn't mean anything if I can't remember. The edition I'm reading from, in case anyone's wondering, is the Putnam edition. I don't think it's a first ed. It could well be a first ed. It has that lovely Dune font from. Is this a first edition? This might be a first edition. I don't know. Mine does not have a cover, a dust cover, sadly. My copy, because I got it at for like 50 cents at a library book sale decades ago now. Good times. First published in 1983. So if you're wondering, the vintage, if you're a sommelier and you need to know the vintage of the particular paper wine that we're working with here. It's 1983. So there. This coming Monday, I will be here. Unlike last week, sadly. And we'll start reading through Full Metal Panic, the first story in the series. They are light novels, so they're not particularly long. How long is it? It is 200 pages if you include the afterword. Actually, it's a bit less than that. Actually, it's more like 180 at most. Closer, in fact, to 175. Not very long. Take us, I don't know, 4 installments maybe at most. Probably closer to 3. 3 for each sounds about right. Because total volume of pages for all 3 stories contained therein is substantial. There are some pictures in. I have some of them, but not all. Let's see. How many pages is that total if you include afterwards? 567, so yeah. 9 is probably not. Actually, it's going to be closer to 11 or 12 installments total. That's fine. Anyway, good times are abound for that. It is a rom-com with military sci-fi teeth, military thriller teeth. And then on Wednesdays, we'll be reading through more of Absolution by Jeff Vandermeer. Things are getting quite dramatic indeed for our prospective character, Old Jim. So we'll go from there and stuff. Anyway, hopefully people enjoy it. If they didn't, sorry. If they did, cool. Either way, feel free to drop me a line in the comments or while I'm doing these. Otherwise, feel free to join the Discord. We can chat there if you really want to. I'm generally present. If I'm not present, I'll get to you. There we go. Yeah, that's what I'll do. Is I'll read out. I'll write out a list of names and possibly terminology used in these books, just so people can see what I'm reading, because I don't frankly trust myself in terms of pronouncing things correctly. I have so much self-doubt. I am racked by it. Racked, I say. Racked by self-doubt. Okay, so as for what I'm doing in the background, this is purest blather sesh. Um, right now, I'm banging through the Old Man's War trilogy by Scalzi. Um, I had forgotten everything after the first book. Um, it's pretty good. I think there's actually a fourth volume now. Let me. But I have them collected in a little box set. Scalzi. John Scalzi. There we go. Who is fortunately ticking. There we go. Old Man's War series. How many? Oh my God. There are a lot more than I thought there were. I knew there were some like um, individual. Wow. Jesus, there's like 7? Will be 7 in September of this year. Lord have mercy. But of course, though, one of them is entitled Hafta Sorval Eats a Churro and Speaks to the Youth of Today. I have not read that. Clearly, I've got more reading to catch up on. So I knew about Zoe's tale. I did not know about the human division or the end of all things or the upcoming shattering peace. So he has really kept up with doing that. Good for him, I think. Oh, sorry, I didn't know about Zoe's tale. I am thinking of the human division. Zoe's tale is the one that's basically just book 3 all over again from a different character's perspective. There's a reason for that. Yeah, okay. I did know about the human division. That's the one I knew about. Never mind. Clearly, I have things to catch up on. I am also reading through, or will be reading through once I'm done with The Last Colony, um, the 2 follow-up books by Stephen Barnes of Street Lethal, which are Gorgon Child and Firelance. Um, I have not gotten to those 2 yet, but I have gotten to Street Lethal. Street Lethal was fun. Um, it's not a book you could readily write nowadays, I don't think, but it does deal with hard issues of mostly drug abuse. Lots of drug abuse. Drug use is definitely recovering from drug use and addiction is a major theme of the book. Also incarceration and the prison industrial complex. It's also touched on pretty heavily. Also the mob. Also homeless people, maybe. It touches on a number of issues, and it's a fun romp. I think the person who recommended it to me in the comments was in the comments of one of the Snow Crash installments. So I want to thank them because I never would have heard of the book otherwise. I knew of Stephen Barnes as an author through his collaborative work with Larry Niven. Larry Niven I have sadly read very little of on stream. I will amend that at some point. At the very least, I'll do, like, certainly I'll do Ringworld. Um, that's a given. Like, Ringworld is a must read. And probably 1 or 2 of the follow-ups, because those are pretty wild too. Um, I think I did I think I did the Manxin Wars Volume 1. I think I read that on stream. I want to say I did, but I'm not 100% sure. I also want to read some of Bert Cole's work. Bert Cole is an author I haven't really been able to pin down as a person. I'm not sure I understand him, but the work I've read by him has been pretty interesting. Also, I think um, it's a pseudonym because he's not um, an American baseball player. I don't think it's him. Yeah, because it's spelled differently. It's Burt Cole. I can find little information on the guy, to be honest, but I haven't looked very hard. Anyway, I do want to read some of his work on here. There's 1 or 2 mecha adjacent or mecha involved video games I might do that are fairly short that I might do for Mecha Mondays if I'm between books. Um, just because it's an important part of the medium, you know. I try to keep it mech adjacent, but there's not too much. other than that I can think of. Yep, that's it. Okay, we're done. Thanks for tuning in. Stay safe, stay sane, and be decent to each other. See you all later. Toodaloo.